Welcome back, learners. In study section 3, we look at the concept of finance, most especially the ethics of finance. And I made mention that for any finance person to perform actively or professionally must be able to be transparent and able to give a good report about the financial position of very company. Especially as an accountant or banker, you must be able to keep your customers' affairs secret, and our word is our bond in finance or accounting. So this is very, very crucial. And also we look at how a company can actually make use of funds in its possession and in order to use it for business activity. And then we look at various types of financial intermediaries that assist the investors, especially who are part of stock market actors, which actually allows investment to be properly managed. And we talk about financial analysts who actually assist, or stockbrokers assist investors to buy or sell stock and shares. This study session, which is section 3, actually going to look at the basics of interest rate. The study session will introduce to the basic of interest rate. The concept of cost of money has its basis in the time value of money. The time value of money is the value of money taken into consideration the interest earned over a given amount of time. For example, if you have 200 naira today and you keep it in your room, that 200 naira cannot be the same in 2 months' time, especially during the inflationary period, because what 200 naira can purchase today in terms of product may not be the same what will be purchased in 2 months' time if there's inflation or high cost of goods, because that 2 naira purchase may be equivalent to 4 naira, and that's what we call time value of money. And this one of the reasons why, in order to provide to protect against the inflationary period, and also to make an investor to benefit from actually giving his money out, is to make a return on such investment, which is called the rate of interest. The trade-off between money holding money now and holding money later by investing depends on, among other things, the rate of interest that can be earned by investing. If you hold money today in your hand, there won't be any return on it unless you use to buy the goods and keep. But the problem is when money is saved, there should be a return for such money, and that is the trade-off, either holding the money or investing the money. And interest rate is the rate at which interest is paid by a borrower for the use of money that is borrowed from a lender. Changes in interest rate level signal the status of the economy. Any borrower of funds normally pay interest, and that is what an investor or the user or the owner of money will be benefiting from actually doing away with his fund, especially by not using the money for consumption. And this interest to be paid depends on the status of the economy, whether the economy is growing or economy is repressing. Crowding out is a phenomenon occurring when expansionary fiscal policies cause interest rates to rise, thereby reducing investment spending. That means increase in government spending crowd out investment spending. When government spend money on spending, so they spend money on consumption, when government spend money, it will actually reduce the government spending on investment. The investment will not take place, and that's why some capital project cannot be done because of the company, the money spent by the government cannot be compensated by doing another investment. So some factors influence market interest rates. One is deferred consumption. When money is loaned, the lender delays spending the money on consumption, and it will actually affect the economy at times. Although, in the long run, the money lent to the lenders may actually do engage in activities in the economy, but consumption of the goods will be reduced, and that may actually affect the economy. Then the second one is inflationary expectation. Most economic generally expect inflation, meaning a given amount of money buys fewer goods in the future. I've already explained it, that inflation can actually tell on the amount of money in one's possession. If 1 naira today may not be the same thing as 1 naira tomorrow, because what 1 naira we purchase today may not be the what 1 naira we're going to purchase in 2 months' time or 3 months' time or a year. Then alternative investment also affects the interest rate. When a lender is trying to choose between using his money in different investments, it affects the interest rate. When majority of people invest in a particular investment or security or financial instrument, it may affect the interest rate in other instruments because of demand and supply. Then risk of investment. In most cases, the higher the risk, the higher the rate of return, and the lower the risk, the lower the rate of return. So there is always a risk that the borrower may become bankrupt, absconded, die, or otherwise default on the loan. Aside the rate of return in terms of whether a company, because all this rate of return depends on whether a company is going to continue in its business, or whether a borrower, a lender, a borrower is going to be default in his borrowing or become bankrupt, or a company is going to liquidate. All these are actually affecting the interest rate in the market. And then when an investor lends or invests his money, always expecting a high rate of return, which will compensate his money being done away without consumption. But when this investment or much money are chasing fewer investment, there will be a kind of high interest rate, because a lower interest rate, because the borrower, we find out that you can actually borrow from more people than when few funds are chasing more investment, which normally attract high interest rate. Then another, people prefer to have their resources available in form of that can immediately be exchanged rather than a form that takes time or money to realize. So people always prefer liquidity investment. They want in the form that they can realize their money on time. This also affects the market interest rate. Then the time structure of interest rate also affects the interest rate. And the time structure of interest rate describes how a given quantity of variable changes with time. Time structure of interest rate, commonly known as yield curve, depicts the interest rate of similar quality bonds at different maturities, because different instruments, financial instruments, have different rates of return or curve, and this can be determined by looking at interest rate of similar bonds in the market. The time structure of interest rate has 3 primary shapes, which can be used by an investor to determine which type of investment it will be actually invest upon in order to look at the rate of return. Upward sloping. When you look at upward sloping, it's a long-term yield and are higher than short-term yield. This is considered to be the normal slope of the curve, of yield curve, and signal the economy is in an expansionary mode, that the economy is expanding. That's what the upward sloping normally indicates. The down sloping, which is short-term yields, are higher than long-term yield. It is dubbed as an inverted yield curve and signifies that the economy is in or about to enter a recessive period. So a downward sloping yield shows that the economy is going to recession, and aside the economy is not become favorable. Then the flat yield, which is very little variation between the short and long-term yield, signal the market is not certain about the future direction of the economy. That shows that the economy is only stable at a particular period, and we don't know whether it's going to be going for expansionary period or recession type. The curve allows an interest rate pattern to be determined, which can be used to discount cash flows appropriately. There are 3 main economics that explain different term structure of interest rate, which are linked to central bank action. The first one is expectation hypothesis of the term structure of interest rate, and is the proposition that the long-term rate is designed by market expectation for the short-term rate plus a constant risk premium. This expectation period of structure of interest rate, it shows that the long-term rate is done by market expectation. That is, it has to depend on what the market is being, the activities in the market. And the liquidity premium theory, aside that long-term interest rate not only reflects investors' assumption about future interest rate, but also include a premium for holding long-term bonds. That is, under the liquidity premium, there are going to be a premium that will pay to the investors, because investors prefer short-term bonds to long-term bonds. So this one will allow the investor to have access to funds as early as possible, and so far his investment is in liquid form. In the segmented market approach, financial instruments of different types are not substitutable. That is, where you have the segmented market approaches, there are different markets which has been segmented into different types of financial aspects of security. So as a result, the supply and demand in the market for short-term and long-term instruments is not likely by independently. That is, so far there's various forms of market segments and various types of instrument. There is difference between the supply and demand in the market for short and long term is determined likely not on, one does not depend on each other, but each has its own way of activities, and we are responding to the market system. Then a yield is the return an investor will receive by holding a bond to maturity. The yield curve is simply financial chart or graph. So if you look at the yield curve under the chart or a graph, it shows which direction that the Central Bank of Nigeria, which is the apex band that determines the interest rate, is trying to go. This can be used to estimate interest rate in the future. It can be used by an investor to determine what will be his the interest that will be earning in the future on investor. A normal yield curve shows the investor believe the CBN is going to raise interest rates in the future. So when the curve, the yield curve is normal, it shows that the Central Bank of Nigeria is going to raise interest in the future. You can now determine whether to invest or not to invest, and how much to invest, and what will be the duration. But for a flat yield curve, so the investor believe the CBN is going to cut interest rate, and that will determine whether to invest or not to invest. Because when the CBN is going to cut interest rate, there's tendency that the economy is going to recession, and then there's need for, although it will also pay those that are borrowing, because they allow them to borrow more, because they will pay less interest. But at the same time, the investor who actually is investing in a financial instrument may not likely, and they may be discouraged or not actually encouraged with this type of policy by the central bank. An inverted yield curve demonstrates that investors believe the CBN is going to dramatically cut interest rate, that the interest rate can be reduced to a barest minimum level, which may not pay an investor. Learners, thank you for listening.